I'm Ethan Thompson, a data security specialist at a company that prefers to keep its name out of the spotlight. My journey so far has been a roller coaster of emotions and challenges, but the final straw came when I realized that my warnings about serious security breaches were being systematically ignored by my boss, Richard. It was an ordinary morning when I walked into the office, but my mood was already charged with accumulated frustration. Since I started working at the company, I have dedicated myself completely to protecting our systems. I spent sleepless nights, analyzed every line of code and identified countless vulnerabilities that could easily be exploited by malicious hackers. However, it appeared that Richard was more interested in securing contracts than ensuring data security. That morning, I decided it was time to confront Richard once again. I knocked on his office door and, without waiting for a response, I entered. "Richard, we need to talk," he said, trying to remain calm. He looked up from the monitor and sighed, visibly irritated. "Ethan, we've discussed this before. We have other priorities at the moment," he replied, with a tone of voice that made it clear that he was not willing to listen to me. "Other priorities? We are talking about the security of our customers' data. If these flaws are not corrected, we will be in serious trouble," I insisted, without letting myself be shaken by his indifference. Richard got up from his chair, walked to the window and looked out, as if trying to escape my presence. "Ethan, you are an excellent professional, but you need to understand that we cannot stop everything because of a possible threat. We have deadlines to meet and contracts to sign," he said, with a coldness that left me perplexed. That was the last straw. I left his office determined to take drastic measures. If Richard didn't listen to me, I was going to make sure everyone in the company knew the danger we were in. I spent the rest of the day planning my next action, aware of the consequences I might face. That night I returned to the office. The security team already knew me well, so it wasn't difficult to get in without arousing suspicion. I sat down at my desk and started working. Using my hacking skills, I broke into the company's own system. It wasn't an easy task, but the adrenaline kept me focused. Every line of code I typed seemed to bring me closer to the truth I so wanted to expose. Hours later, I was able to gather damning evidence of the vulnerabilities Richard was ignoring. I printed the reports, made backup copies and saved everything on a pen drive. I was exhausted, but I knew this was just the beginning. The next day, I entered the office with a mix of anxiety and determination. I knew my actions would not go unnoticed. When Richard found out what I had done, there would be consequences. But, at that moment, all that mattered was protecting the integrity of the company's data and, consequently, the security of our customers. I spent the morning preparing a detailed presentation about the security flaws. When I finished, I sent an email to all the directors, including Richard, calling for an emergency meeting. It didn't take long for my phone to ring. "Ethan, come to my office immediately," Richard said, his voice full of anger. I took a deep breath and walked to his room. When I walked in, I saw that he was holding the reports I had printed the night before. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, throwing the papers on the table. "I'm doing what you should have done a long time ago, Richard." "I'm protecting our company," I replied, without letting myself be intimidated. He stared at me for a few seconds, as if trying to decide what to do. So he picked up the phone and called security. "Ethan, you are suspended until further notice." "Let's discuss this with the council," he said, as two security guards entered the room. I left the room with my head held high. I knew I was taking a big risk, but I also knew I had done the right thing. My fight was just beginning, and I was willing to face any consequences to ensure the safety and integrity of our company. When I decided to hack into the company's own system to expose its vulnerabilities, I knew I was about to cross a dangerous line, but my conscience wouldn't allow me to do otherwise. I had warned Richard several times about critical data security flaws, but he always ignored me, treating my concerns as unnecessary scaremongering. "Richard, we need to fix these flaws before someone exploits them," I insisted at the last meeting. "Ethan, we've already discussed this. Our security is up to standard. Let's move on," he replied impatiently. I left the room feeling a mixture of frustration and determination. If Richard wouldn't take action, I would. I spent the next few nights awake, developing a meticulous plan to break into systems without being detected. I used all my hacking skills, accumulated over the years, to ensure that I could prove my point without leaving any obvious traces. Finally, in the early hours of a Friday, when network traffic was minimal, I executed my hack. Each line of code I wrote felt heavier, as if the gravity of my actions were materializing with each keystroke. In a short time, I was able to access restricted areas of the system that should never be vulnerable. It was alarming how easily I entered. "Laura, I need you to look at this," I said to my data analyst colleague the next morning. Laura was one of the few people I completely trusted. "Ethan, what did you do?" she asked, surprised but not judging, just curious. "I hacked the system," I admitted, handing him a folder full of evidence. "Here are all the vulnerabilities I reported that were ignored. We need to do something before it's too late." Laura analyzed the documents carefully. "This is serious. We need to take this to the board of directors." Before we could act, a storm formed. The company discovered the intrusion, and in one swift move, Richard called an emergency meeting. I was called to the conference room, where I was met with serious faces and accusing looks. "Do you have any idea what you did, Ethan?" Richard snapped. "Break into our own systems? You put the company at risk." "No, Richard, I revealed the risks you refused to see," I replied firmly, holding the evidence in hand. "Here are all the flaws you ignored. If you had listened to me, this wouldn't have been necessary." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed my words. The moral and legal dilemma was established. I had hacked into the company's system, but my intentions were clear and justified. The tension in the air was palpable. "Ethan, you understand that your actions have consequences, right?" Laura whispered to me while the others discussed. "Yes, Laura, I understand," I replied, feeling the weight of each word. But I couldn't stand by and watch this happen. The meeting ended with a temporary decision: an internal investigation would be conducted. Meanwhile, I have been suspended from my duties, pending the verdict. I knew I was at a crossroads, but my conscience was clear. He had done what he believed was right. In the following weeks, tension increased. My family was worried, and the possibility of losing my job hung over me like a sword of Damocles. However, I continued to work with Laura to gather more evidence, because something told me that Richard was hiding more than simple negligence. "We have to move on, Laura. There's more here than meets the eye," I told her, as we worked on our parallel investigation. "I agree, Ethan. And we're going to figure it all out," she replied, with determination. And so, even when faced with the legal and ethical consequences of my actions, I knew I couldn't give up. I had started this journey to protect the integrity of the company, and I would not stop until the truth was revealed. As I faced the imminent possibility of being fired and sued, a disturbing truth came to light: Richard was deliberately downplaying security risks to cover up a critical vulnerability. It was a low and audacious blow, something I would never have imagined. It all started when I found myself sitting in the conference room, waiting to be called in for a disciplinary hearing. The atmosphere was full of tension. I could feel it on my skin. Laura, my colleague and confidant, entered the room and sat next to me. She looked as worried as I did. Before either of us could speak, she broke the silence. "Ethan, I've been analyzing some of the data you gave me. There's something very wrong here," Laura said, her voice shaking. "I know, Laura. Richard is hiding something very big. But what exactly did you find?" I asked, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Laura showed me some graphs and reports. "Look here. This specific vulnerability isn't just an oversight. It's a gigantic hole that, if exploited, could compromise our entire system. And what's more, this multimillion-dollar contract with the new client. Richard knew the risk and yet decided to proceed." My mind started to spin. "So he's putting the entire company at risk to secure this contract?" "Exactly," Laura replied. He's willing to do anything to keep this a secret, including sacrificing us. The revelation came as a shock. I knew Richard was ambitious, but I didn't realize he would be so reckless. The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming. However, there was no time for regrets. We needed to act, and quickly. Laura, we need more proof. Something that goes beyond what we already have. We need something that is definitive, I said, determined. Laura nodded. We have to be careful. Richard isn't going down without a fight. With that, we began a deeper investigation. We spent sleepless nights, searching every corner of the company's system, looking for the definitive proof that would unmask Richard. During one of these nights, while we were in the server room, Laura paused and looked at me. Ethan, do you think we're doing the right thing? She asked, her voice thick with uncertainty. Laura, I know it's risky, but we can't allow Richard to go through with this. We need to protect the company and everyone who depends on it, I replied, trying to offer some reassurance. Finally, we found what we were looking for. An encrypted email, an exchange between Richard and an external contact, discussing the vulnerability and how they could exploit it to gain an advantage in the contract. It was the proof we needed. That's enough. We have to take this to the council, Laura said, her eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and fear. Before we could act, Richard appeared in the server room. His intentions were clear. So, you thought you could fool me? You two are in serious trouble, he said, his voice cold and calculating. Richard, we know everything. We have proof, I said, trying to remain calm. What you have are just assumptions. Nothing that can't be disproved, he replied, with a sinister smile. But Richard underestimated our determination. With Laura's help, we were able to not only escape the situation, but also ensure that the evidence was turned over to the board of directors. The fight was far from over, but at least we had a chance. As I looked at Laura, I felt a rush of gratitude. She was by my side the entire time, even when things seemed impossible. Thank you, Laura. I couldn't have done this without you, I said, sincerely. We're in this together, Ethan. And we'll see it through to the end, she replied, with an encouraging smile. The battle was just beginning, but I knew that with Laura by my side, we could face anything. When I decided to investigate Richard's actions further, I felt a mix of determination and nervousness. I knew I was treading dangerous ground, but the injustice and corruption I had witnessed could not be ignored. I needed someone to trust, someone who could help me gather solid evidence, and luckily I found that person in Laura. Laura was a brilliant data analyst, always meticulous in her work. From the beginning, I realized that she also had her reservations about Richard. One afternoon, while we were reviewing some security logs, I decided to share my suspicions with her. Laura, I need to talk to you about something serious, I began, trying to hide my anxiety. She looked up from the monitor, curious. Of course, Ethan. What there was. I took a deep breath and told him everything, from my failed attempts to warn Richard to the discovery of his unethical practices. I think Richard is selling sensitive company information. I found some clues, but I need concrete proof. Laura was silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the situation. This is very serious, Ethan. If he really is doing this, we could be in for a huge scandal. I'm with you on this one. Let's investigate together. From that moment on, we began working side by side, reviewing files, logs and any clue that could help us expose Richard. We often spent entire nights immersed in data, searching for that loose thread that could reveal the truth. One night, while we were analyzing a set of encrypted emails, Laura found something. Ethan, look at this. She exclaimed, pointing at the screen. These emails appear to be communications between Richard and an outside buyer. They are discussing values and exchanging confidential information. This is exactly what we need. I replied, feeling a surge of adrenaline. Now, we just need more evidence to corroborate this. Over the next few days, we were able to gather a significant amount of evidence. Richard was involved in unethical practices, selling sensitive company information to make money on the side. Each discovery brought us closer to the truth, and our partnership grew stronger with each step. "Laura, I don't know how I would be doing this without you," I confessed in a moment of vulnerability. "Thank you for believing in me." She smiled, her gaze full of determination. "We're in this together, Ethan. And let's go to the end." Over time, our relationship evolved. The trust and complicity we developed at work began to be reflected in our personal lives. Dinner after dinner, conversation after conversation, we grew closer, discovering common interests and creating a bond that went beyond the professional. Once, during dinner, Laura paused, looked into my eyes and said, "Ethan, you know that no matter what happens, I'm on your side, right?" I touched his hand across the table, feeling a deep connection. "I know, Laura. And I'm on your side too. Let's face this together." Our determination only grew as we found more evidence. We knew we were treading dangerous ground, especially when Richard became suspicious of our actions. We needed to be careful, but we were more determined than ever to expose the truth. Every day was a new challenge, but the partnership with Laura gave me the strength to continue. We knew we were doing the right thing and that together we could fight corruption and protect the integrity of the company. The journey was far from over, but with Laura by my side, I felt like we could face anything. And so, we continued our investigation, determined to bring justice and reveal Richard's true face. The relationship between Laura and I began to intensify in a way I didn't expect. It all started with small meetings to discuss the evidence we had gathered against Richard. Initially, these were professional meetings, but I soon realized there was something more. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Ethan?" Laura asked me one night while we were in my apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and laptops. "I don't see any other way out, Laura. Richard is compromising the company's security and, if we don't do something, the consequences could be catastrophic," I replied, looking her in the eyes. "But that doesn't mean I'm not scared." "I'm scared, actually." She smiled slightly, something that always gave me courage. "We're in this together, Ethan. I trust you." Those words meant the world to me. From that moment on, we felt a connection that went beyond the professional. We spent nights working side by side, and inevitably our conversations became more personal. I discovered that Laura also had her own battles at the company, struggles that she faced with the same determination she now shared with me. "Why did you decide to become a data analyst?" I asked her one night while we were taking a break. She sighed, looking out the window at the city skyline. "I've always liked unraveling mysteries and finding patterns. It's like solving a giant puzzle." "What about you? Why hacker?" I laughed softly. "I think for the same reason. I've always liked challenges, testing my limits and, in a way, doing what's right, even if in an unconventional way." Our bond grew stronger, and with that, the pressure also increased. Richard became suspicious of our actions. He once called me into his office. "Thompson, I've heard rumors that you've been asking a lot of questions," said Richard, with a sharp look. "I'm just doing my job, Richard. Data security is paramount," I replied, trying to sound calm. "I hope you are aware that certain actions have consequences." He ended the conversation with a threatening tone. I left the office feeling a knot in my stomach. I told Laura everything that night. "He knows, Laura. Richard knows we're after him." She looked at me with concern. "We need to be more careful. But this just proves that we are on the right path. We can't stop now." The tension was rising, but so was our connection. We started spending more time together outside of work, and it soon became clear that our feelings went beyond professional camaraderie. "Do you think we're crazy for doing this?" I asked Laura as we walked through the park after another hard day. "Maybe," she replied, holding my hand. "But I'd rather be crazy next to someone I trust completely." That simple confession solidified what I already knew. Laura wasn't just a coworker or an ally in our mission. She had become someone indispensable in my life. Over time, our alliance based on trust and a desire to expose the truth became a full partnership, both professional and personal. But we knew we couldn't let our guard down. Richard was increasingly suspicious, and the sense of imminent danger was palpable. "We're going to make it, Ethan," Laura said one sleepless night as we lay side by side. "If we're together, I'm sure we will," I replied, holding his hand tightly. And so, strengthened by our union, we continued to face the challenges that lay ahead, determined to expose the truth and guarantee the integrity of the company. We knew the journey would be arduous, but the trust we built in each other gave us the strength we needed to move forward. Facing the growing tension in my personal life was one of the biggest challenges I've ever experienced. My family, understandably, was worried about the legal consequences of my actions. I knew that my work as a data security specialist was crucial to the livelihood of all of us, and the possibility of losing my job was a constant shadow that hung over my every decision. I remember one particularly difficult night, when I came home exhausted after a long day of investigation. My wife, Clara, was waiting for me in the living room, a worried expression on her face. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, her voice full of apprehension. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. "I know, Clara. I know everything is very complicated right now." "It's not just complicated, Ethan. You could get fired. You could get sued. And if that happens, how are we going to support the family? How are we going to pay the bills?" She was almost crying, and it broke my heart. "I understand your concerns, love. But I couldn't just ignore what was happening. Richard was putting the entire company at risk, and I couldn't turn a blind eye to that." "But haven't you thought about the consequences for us?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. "You're always so brave and determined, but this time it seems like you've gone too far." "I know," I replied, feeling guilt consume me. But I couldn't live with myself knowing that I could have done something and didn't. "I'm trying to protect the company, protect our jobs in the long term." Clara sighed, wiping away a tear that was running down her face. "What about Laura? You trust her so much. What if she betrays you? What if something goes wrong?" "Laura is on my side, Clara. She wants the truth as much as I do. I know it's hard to understand, but I feel like we're doing the right thing." That night, I realized how much my fight for justice was affecting my family. The tension was not limited to the workplace, it overflowed into every aspect of my life. Still, the determination to fight corruption and protect the integrity of the company continued to guide me, like a moral compass that I could not ignore. In the midst of all these personal challenges, my relationship with Laura became an anchor in a stormy sea. Our meetings became more frequent, our conversations deeper. Once, while we were working together in a cafe, she looked me in the eyes and said, "Ethan, I know this is hard. I know you're risking a lot. But remember, you're not alone. We're in this together." Those words were a balm for my soul. Knowing that I had someone by my side, who shared the same mission and the same ideals, gave me the strength to continue. The pressure increased every day, especially when Richard became suspicious of our actions. We were being watched closely, and any misstep could be fatal. I remember one night in particular when Laura and I were analyzing some sensitive data that we had managed to access. She looked at me and said, "Ethan, we need to be extremely careful. Richard is keeping an eye on us. Any mistake and he'll catch us." "I know," I replied, trying to remain calm. "But we're close to getting the evidence we need. Just a little more and we'll be able to expose everything." Despite all the tension, the relationship between Laura and I became increasingly solid. We formed an alliance based on trust and the desire to expose the truth. Each discovery, each step forward, brought us closer to the ultimate goal, but also increased the risk. My life was at a boiling point, with personal and professional challenges intertwining in an almost unbearable way. However, my determination remained unshakable. I was willing to go to any lengths to protect the integrity of the company and ensure justice prevailed, even if it meant sacrificing my own security and stability. And with Laura by my side, I knew I had a real chance of winning this battle. With Laura's help, I was able to gather enough evidence to justify our actions and expose Richard's negligence. It was hard and tireless work, but we finally had in our hands a detailed dossier that could change the direction of the company. Laura and I were determined to present him to the board of directors and reveal all the security flaws and unethical practices that Richard had been hiding. "We have everything here, Ethan," Laura said, holding a folder full of documents and flash drives with recordings. "That should be more than enough to convince the council." "I know, Laura," I replied, feeling the mixture of relief and tension pulsing through my veins. "But we have to be extremely careful. Richard won't let this go easily." The plan was simple: we would go to the board in the late afternoon, when most members would be available. But, as we predicted, Richard discovered our plan before we could act. He was cunning and had eyes and ears in every corner of the company. That morning, I received an anonymous message on my corporate email. "I know what you and Laura are doing. Meet me in conference room B at noon. Alone." I showed the message to Laura. "It's a trap," she said, concern evident in her voice. "He will try to silence us." "But we can't back down now," I said, trying to remain calm. "We have to go. But we need to be prepared for anything." At noon, Laura and I walked together to conference room B. The hallway seemed longer than ever, each step increasing our anxiety. When we entered, Richard was already there, with a cold, calculating smile on his face. "Ah, Ethan, Laura, I'm glad you could make it," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "You know, I really expected you guys to be smarter than this. Trying to expose my secrets? What a disappointment." "Richard, we know what you're doing," I said, my voice steady. "And we have enough evidence to take you down. You'd better give up now." He laughed, an icy sound that echoed through the room. "You think you can take me down? I'm untouchable here. But I admire your courage. I'll give you a chance to get out of this without any major damage. Give everything you have and maybe I'll consider not ruining your careers and lives." Laura squeezed my hand under the table, a sign of support and determination. "Never," she said, her voice full of conviction. "Let's go all the way with this." Richard narrowed his eyes, his expression turning dark. "Very well, you chose the difficult path," he said, standing up. "Let's see how you guys fare with the consequences." He left the room, leaving us with a sense of imminent danger. We knew he had something planned to silence us, but we had no idea what. Laura and I decided we needed to act fast. We went directly to the office of one of the most influential board members, whom I knew I could trust. "Mr. Henderson, we need to speak to you urgently," I said, entering his office. "It's about Richard and the company's security failures." He looked at us with curiosity, but also with growing concern. "Sit down, Ethan, Laura. What's going on?" We handed him the dossier and began to explain everything. As we spoke, I could see Henderson's expression change from surprise to outrage. "This is unacceptable," he said finally. "We will call an emergency board meeting immediately." As we prepared for the meeting, Laura and I knew the battle wasn't over yet. We needed to be ready for anything Richard could throw at us. But we were determined to fight for the truth and the integrity of the company. And finally, with Henderson's support and the evidence we gathered, we had a real chance of winning. The tension in the air was palpable. Laura and I were locked in the small meeting room, surrounded by files, laptops and documents scattered everywhere. The dossier was almost ready, and we knew this was our last chance to expose Richard before he could silence us for good. But deep down, I felt something was wrong. It was as if a shadow hung over us, a feeling that we were being watched. "Do you think we have everything we need?" Laura asked, her voice low and worried. "Yes, I reviewed everything. We have enough evidence to take Richard down," I replied, trying to remain calm. Suddenly, the door opened with a bang and Richard entered, followed by 2 security guards. His gaze was cold and calculating, and he seemed more dangerous than ever. "So this is where the rats hide," he said, a sinister smile forming on his lips. "Did you really think you could take me down?" Laura took a step forward, trying to stand her ground. "We know what you did, Richard. We have proof of all your unethical practices." He let out a dismissive laugh. "Evidence? Who's going to believe you? I'm the boss here, and I have the power to destroy your lives in the blink of an eye." My heart skipped a beat, but I knew I couldn't show fear. "You can try, Richard, but the truth always comes out. We won't stop until justice is served." Richard came closer, his face just inches from mine. "You're very naive, Ethan. You have no idea what you're getting into. This isn't a game." The security guards moved forward, and I knew we had little time. Laura, surprisingly quickly, grabbed one of the laptops and began transferring the files to a secure server. I needed to buy time. "Richard, why do this? You could have been a great leader, but you chose the wrong path." "Why?" I asked, trying to keep his attention on me. "Money, power, control," he replied coldly. "Do you really think integrity and honesty have any value in this world? You are a fool, Ethan." Suddenly, one of the security guards grabbed Laura, trying to snatch the laptop from her hands. I acted on instinct, lunging at him and knocking the man to the ground. Laura managed to finish the transfer, but we were at a disadvantage. "It's the end of the line for you," Richard said, taking a gun out of his jacket. "Say goodbye, Ethan." It was then that everything changed. The door to the room opened again, this time revealing the company's internal security team, accompanied by members of the board of directors. They had been alerted by Laura's file transfer. "Richard, put the gun down and back away," ordered one of the council members. "We know everything." Richard went pale, the gun shaking in his hands. "You don't know anything. They lied. I'm innocent." "We have enough evidence to prove otherwise," said the security team leader. "You are in custody." Richard tried to resist, but was quickly disarmed and taken away. The feeling of relief was overwhelming. Laura and I hugged, knowing we had won a crucial battle, but there was still a long way to go. "We did it," I whispered, voice breaking. "We did it." Laura smiled, her eyes shining with tears of relief. "Yes, we did it. Now we can finally expose the whole truth." As the security team began collecting evidence and the board of directors asked us questions, I knew this was just the beginning of a new phase. We had faced danger head-on and survived, and that made us stronger and more united than ever. With Richard temporarily neutralized, Laura and I knew we had a short window to act. Time was our enemy, and every second wasted could mean the loss of our exams and, possibly, our careers. We decided not to waste time and went directly to the board meeting room. When we got there, we were greeted with suspicious looks. The board members were all company veterans, accustomed to the status quo and possibly passive accomplices to Richard's practices. However, the firmness in our gaze and the urgency in our voice were enough to ensure that they heard us. "We need to speak to you immediately. This is a matter of extreme importance to the company's security," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "That's highly irregular," Thompson, one of the board members, Mr. Martinez, responded with a raised eyebrow. "But go on." I looked at Laura, who nodded encouragingly. I took a deep breath and began to explain everything we had discovered. For weeks, I have been warning about critical flaws in the security of our systems. These warnings were ignored by Richard, who deliberately downplayed the risks. Upon further investigation, Laura and I discovered that he has been involved in unethical practices, including selling sensitive information. The room fell silent, and I could feel the weight of the eyes on us. I continued. "We have documented proof of all the vulnerabilities in Richard's actions. He was willing to compromise the company's security to avoid losing a $1 million contract. And when he realized we were close to exposing the truth, he tried to silence us." Laura took the dossier we had prepared and began distributing copies to each board member. "Here is all the evidence. We include transaction records, emails and access logs that prove the accusations." The tension in the room was palpable. The board members began to leaf through the documents, exchanging worried glances. Mr. Martinez looked back at us, this time with a more serious expression. This is very serious. We need time to review all of this, he said, but there was a tone of urgency in his voice that indicated he was aware of the gravity of the situation. At that moment, the door opened abruptly, and Richard entered, with a furious expression. "What's going on here?" he demanded, looking directly at Laura and me. "We're presenting the council with evidence of your actions, Richard," I said, trying to remain calm. "The evidence they tried to hide." Richard laughed, but there was a note of desperation in his laugh. "You think you can take me down like that? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Before he could continue, Mr. Martinez intervened. "Richard, the allegations against you are serious. We need you to leave this meeting immediately while we conduct an internal investigation." Richard tried to protest, but two security guards, who had been discreetly called, entered and escorted him out of the room. The tension eased a little, but we knew that the battle was not yet completely won. Laura held my hand under the table, a gesture of silent support. "We'll make it, Ethan," she whispered. I spent the rest of the meeting answering questions and providing more details about the evidence we had collected. The board decided to launch an immediate internal investigation and review all of the company's security policies. It was a small relief, but we knew there was still a lot of work to do to ensure the truth fully came to light. When we left the room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Laura smiled at me and said, "We're on the right track. Now it's just a matter of time before everything gets sorted out." I knew she was right. We had taken a huge step towards exposing corruption and protecting the integrity of the company. And with Richard temporarily out of the way, we had a real chance to get justice. At the end of this tumultuous journey, I was exhausted but determined. Things had reached a critical point, and everything Laura and I had done culminated in that moment. In the conference room, the board of directors was meeting, and the tension in the air was palpable. Richard was sitting at the end of the table, with a look of disdain that he didn't bother to hide. Laura was by my side, and I could feel the strength and determination radiating from her. "Let's begin," said the chairman of the board, looking directly at me. "Mr. Thompson, do you have anything to present?" I took a deep breath and started. "Yes, I have." I connected my laptop to the projector and began displaying a series of documents and recordings that Laura and I had collected. These are proof of security vulnerabilities that I tried to warn about for months but were ignored. Council members whispered among themselves, clearly shocked by the extent of the failures. But that was just the beginning. Furthermore, I continued, I found evidence that Richard was deliberately underestimating these risks. Richard interrupted, his face red with anger. "This is nonsense. These allegations are baseless and harmful." It was then that I played the trick up my sleeve. "Unfounded? Let's see what you say about that." With one click, I started playing the secret recording I made during our confrontation. The room fell silent as Richard's voice echoed over the speakers, admitting his unethical practices and selling sensitive information. "This is a setup," shouted Richard, desperate. Laura, always calm and precise, intervened. "We can easily authenticate this recording. And if we need to, we have more evidence to corroborate everything that was said." The chairman of the board raised his hand to silence Richard. "That is enough. Richard, you are suspended immediately, and an internal investigation will be launched." Richard stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "You're going to regret this." He left the room, slamming the door loudly. I breathed a sigh of relief. The weight he carried on his shoulders felt a little lighter. But the meeting was not over yet. "Mr. Thompson," said the chairman of the board, looking at me with a serious expression. "Your actions were controversial, to say the least. But considering the circumstances and the irrefutable evidence you presented, we decided to not only keep your job, but also offer you a promotion." I was stunned for a moment. "A promotion?" "Yes," he confirmed. "Your courage and integrity saved this company from potential disaster. You will be the new Chief Data Security Officer." Laura squeezed my hand tightly, a wide smile lighting up her face. Congratulations, Ethan. You deserve it. After the meeting, Laura and I went out to celebrate. We sat in a quiet bar, away from the hustle and bustle of the day. You really did, Laura said, raising her glass in a toast. You changed everything. I smiled, still trying to process everything. I couldn't have done this without you by my side, Laura. We're a team. She nodded. Yes, we are. And we will be, both at work and outside of it. At that moment, I realized that our professional partnership had evolved into something deeper. Laura wasn't just a colleague or a friend, she was my partner in every way. To new stages, I said, raising my glass. To new phases, she repeated, and we toasted the future that awaited us. From that day on, the company began a complete overhaul of its security policies, and a thorough investigation into Richard's practices was conducted. I, now in charge of data security, worked tirelessly to ensure nothing like this ever happened again. And by my side, always, was Laura, not just as a colleague, but as a life partner. Together, we faced the challenges that arose, strengthened by everything we had been through. The future looked promising, full of new opportunities and, above all, integrity.